The Chicago Blackhawks have announced that General Manager Stan Bowman and Coach Joe Quenneville will both return next season in their respective jobs. We're going to discuss the decision and how this impacts the team. Coming up next. Welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. If you're new to the channel, thanks for stopping by. We review and discuss all 31 NHL teams. So if you're a huge hockey fan, consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. So as I mentioned off the top, Blackhawks team president have confirmed that the general manager Stan Bowman and head coach Joe Quenneville will both return in their respective positions for next season. Obviously, this is the first time in quite a while that the Blackhawks are down near the bottom of the standings and are going to be missing the playoffs. So obviously both Quenneville and Bowman have been with the organization for a long time. Obviously the Blackhawks value that long-term history they have with these guys, and they still believe that they'd be the right guys to turn things around. So what we're going to do here quickly now is want to take a quick look at their histories with the club, and then we'll discuss a little further if I think this was the right decision or what this could mean for the team going forward. So obviously Joe Quenneville, Coach Q, has been with the team now for 10 seasons. They've had 3 Stanley Cups. They've had 3 division titles. They've also made it in 2 other seasons and went as far as the conference finals. So in 5 of the 10 seasons that he's been the head coach, they've either gone to the conference final or to the Stanley Cup final, winning 3 times. So overall, I mean, that's pretty solid work. I mean, Joe Quenneville is the second most winningest coach in NHL history. Obviously, he's had a long tenure here before his time with the Hawks. He coached the St. Louis Blues as well as the Colorado Avalanche. He's had a tremendously successful coaching career, and I think if the Blackhawks were to let him go, obviously I think he'd be snatched up in a heartbeat by just about any club out there. But I know we've talked about this on this channel before, discussing who between coaches and general managers, mostly coaches, might be let go during the offseason. You know, this was a season that we saw some rarities this year, meaning that there was no NHL coaches let go. It's something that almost always happens, anywhere from 3, 4, 5. We've seen as many as 6 or 7 in some seasons where coaches were terminated during the season. We've gone through almost the entire season here with only a couple days left, and no coaches have yet to be fired this season. So I fully suspect that we will at least see at least a few here coming up once the offseason kicks in. For a lot of these teams, their season is going to be over after the weekend. I wouldn't be surprised between Sunday, Monday, or into next week that we see at least a couple of teams announce of certain positions like coaches or assistant coaches of people that may not be returning for next season. Teams that missed the playoffs often do that early on, so they have plenty of time to get their new people in place before the season starts and before we get into like the draft and free agency and all those things. So they have their leadership group and the coaching staff, general managers, all in place so they can prepare for the next season. So obviously, like I said, Quenneville's been highly successful. Stan Bowman's been with the Blackhawks even longer. Originally joined the team back in 2001. He worked in different positions, including assistant general manager, before replacing Dale Tallon in the summer of 2009. So obviously, Quenneville's been the head coach just a 1 season longer than Bowman's been the GM, but of course Bowman was part of the organization as an assistant GM and other roles prior to that. So he's been working with the Blackhawks organization now for about 17 years. So obviously that loyalty's paid off and give them another chance to get things turned around. So I know in my past videos discussing who might be let go and stuff, like personally I thought the Blackhawks might be ready for a change. I know you can't just kind of necessarily throw it all away with all the history there with one bad season, but you got to take a look at what the team is doing and where the team is at. And in all honesty, they've got a lot of guys locked up for a long term here that it's going to be difficult, I think, to pull themselves out. Obviously, their younger players are looking pretty solid, and their youth is going to have to be what gets them out here, because a lot of these guys just don't have tradable contracts, and they can't buy everybody out either. So I mean, there's obviously, you look at Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, are each making $10.5 million. They've got 5 more years to go. They got Artem Anisimov, 3 more years at $4.5 million. They've got Brandon Saad, 3 more years at $6 million. And here's a real killer here. Brent Seabrook, 6 more years at $6.875. I mean, that's arguably the worst contract in the NHL. And Duncan Keith also has 5 more years at $5.5 million. I mean, Seabrook is going to end up being, I think it puts him at 39 years old when the contract's out. And that's also not even including Marian Hossa's contract, which also has another 3 years left on it. At I believe it's 5 point something, but he's on long-term injury reserve. That's not hurting him quite as much, but if he ever plans on making a return, which is unclear at this point, that could be an issue. And they still have Corey Crawford for 2 more years at $6 million. And I do think it's fair to say that his health and his production going forward as their goaltender could be questionable, considering how long he's been injured this year. And will he be able to resume next year and take over that #1 job back and get back to normal? So that's certainly a big question mark as well. But they certainly need help on defense, and they've got these 2 killer contracts between Keith and Seabrook. You know, you can't fault too much Taves and Kane. Kane's still producing pretty decently. I don't think they're ready to give up on Brandon Saad yet. I mean, Jonathan Taves, for what he makes, I guess they're paying him a lot for his leadership, because his numbers are not really where they need to be to justify that kind of contract any longer. Although he never really was a huge point producer, it's really all the other types of factors that he brings to the table here. But I mean, at the end of the day, they've got a lot of bad contracts, and you can't help but blame the general manager that gave it to them. I mean, some of these contracts were signed before the contract rules were changed with the last CBA. I mean, we saw some pretty ridiculous contracts being handed out and adding on a whole bunch of extra years. They're basically loopholes to work around the salary cap and bring the average values down to make the numbers work per season. And a lot of these contracts are just going to end up on long-term injury reserve or whatnot until some of these players' careers finish up. So I really thought they might be ready for a fresh start, especially at the general manager level. If I had to pick only one of the two to move out and give a new fresh start, it would be Bowman. I mean, considering how long he's worked for the organization, wouldn't surprise me to see them move him into a different role, maybe an advisory role or something a little bit more senior, and then given another somebody else like a fresh start at the GM role. So if you're a Hawks fan, what do you think of this move? Do you think this is the right decision to bring back Quenneville and Bowman? Or do you think one or the other or both should have been replaced going into next year? And if you're not a Hawks fan, obviously, you know, depending if you're a team that might have been looking for a head coach, obviously Joel Quenneville's not going to be on the market this season. So if you're hoping that your team might get rid of the coach and bring in a top guy like Quenneville, unfortunately that's not going to happen. So leave some comments down below and let me know what you think of the Hawks' decision to move forward with these 2 guys. Personally, I think it's, you know, I don't entirely blame them for giving them a little bit more time, considering their history and all the success that they've had. But at the same time, I do think it might be time for a fresh start in Chicago. If you're new to the channel, I hope you'll consider subscribing. We cover all 31 NHL teams. There's plenty of content here for all fan bases to enjoy, so I hope you consider that if you're new. If you haven't done so already, consider following us on Twitter. You're going to find our Twitter handle on the screen right here. We're very active on Twitter, so consider checking that out. As always, thank you very much for watching, everybody. We'll catch you next time.